Join as we learn Chumash for Shabbos, the seventh Torah reading of Parshas Vayikra, chapter 5, verse 11. Yesterday we began with a variable sin offering, a person who can't afford, or different sin offerings which depended on the person's amount of wealth, of what he would bring for that sin offering. Yesterday we spoke about the birds that were brought. Today we continue that if a person can't afford the birds, he can still bring the meal offering. We then continue with the different types of guilt offerings, a guilt offering for misappropriation, a suspensive guilt offering, and a guilt offering for dishonesty. Chapter 5, verse 11. What happens if a person can't even afford the two turtle doves, the two pigeons, two young pigeons? And will then bring a sacrifice for what he committed. Asiris ha'efa. He is then going to bring 1/10 of an ephah, which would be today's measurements 2.6 quarts of soiles, fine flour. Lechatas as a sin offering. Lo yasim ala Hashem, and he should not put on it oil. V'litan al levena, he should not place on it any frankincense. Ki chatasi, because this is a sin offering. Rashi, ki chatasi, because this is a sin offering. Ve'im bedin shei karbani muhuder. And therefore, it's not appropriate that you should be an elaborate type of sacrifices. You give it the basic as it is. Chatas, the Torah continues, verse 12. He brings it to the Kohen. The kamat HaKohen mimena, then the Kohen takes from it, scoops from it. Mimena malei kumtzei, a fistful. As askarasa, as a memorial. Vayikra mizbecha, brings it on the altar. Alishe Hashem, on the fire of Hashem chatasi. This is a sin offering. What does it mean? Why does it say it again? Nik mitzav niknetar lishma, that if it was scooped and put on the fire for intent, ksher, it's kosher. Shalei lishma, but if it was not for the intent of a sin offering, psula, it's unfit. Verse 13. And the Kohen will then make an atonement for his sin that he had committed, asher chata, that he committed, me'achas meila, from one of these, v'nislach loy, and then he is forgiven, v'hoysel HaKohen kemincha, and the Kohen, and it is for the Kohen who gets the meal offering from it. Al chatase asher chata, Rashi says, kan shina kasuf, over here, the Torah changes the language and doesn't say the same terminology like the previous sacrifices. Sharei b'shirus u'bedalos, when it came to the rich or the poor, when it came to the goat or to the turtle doves and pigeons, nemar mechatase, from his sin. V'kan bedali dalos, but over here when a person's really poor, that he's only bringing a meal offering, nemar, it says al chatase, on the sin. Diktus u'rabisenu mikan, the rabbis have learned from here, that if a person sinned while he was wealthy and he set aside money to buy a sheep or a young goat, or then what happens in the end, he becomes poor and he brings from it two turtle doves, and then this poor person who is sinned and set aside money, and to bring, and he sets aside money to contribute, and he brings two doves. Then he gets even poorer. And he brings 1/10 of an ephah, which is the poorest kind of sacrifice of a meal offering. Therefore it says from his sin, meaning that as you notice, he's going less and less. He started off that he brought a sheep, then he goes to bringing a pigeon, and then he goes on, the lowest of the low, to be able to bring a meal offering. This is also telling us what happens if a person started off and he put aside money to bring only a meal offering because he was very poor. And then he got wealthier. Then he should go and bring a sacrifice of a wealthy person. Therefore it says, al chatasai, on the sin, telling us that sometimes he has to bring an additional sacrifice should he become wealthier and able to afford it. From one of these, from one of these three types of atonements that we mentioned, whether wealthy, poor, or really poor. Why does the Torah have to tell me this from all the one of these three? I would think I would think that if you do a very strict and terrible sin, you should have to bring a more expensive animal. And if you do a very not such a terrible sin, if you want to call it that, then you should be able to only bring a like a meal offering by Yibum Mitzvah Seifa. Talmud Leimar, therefore the Torah tells us that any of these three sins, meaning that they're all equally, lahashves kalan lachamurim, to show you that there's no such thing as a stringent sin or an easy sin or a weak sin. They're all obligatory to be able to bring according to a person's ability. That means if you're able to afford a sheep or a goat, that's what you got to bring. As a chamurim lekalan asiris eifel v'dali dalos. So too, even if a person's very poor and he's only able to afford a meal offering and he did a severe sin, it also works. And this is what the Torah is telling us, that they're all equal. One shouldn't think, oh, this wasn't such a great sin, so therefore I can get away by bringing a meal offering. If you're able to afford a sheep, it doesn't make a difference the severity of the sin. You have to bring the sheep or the goat. This tells us that about the meal offering of a one who sinned, that the leftovers were able to be eaten by the Kohen. That's a simple interpretation. The rabbis explain that if the person who sinned was actually a Kohen, then it would be like any other meal offering that a Kohen brings, that nobody gets to eat it, and all of it gets burnt on the altar. Verse 14. And God speaks to Moshe saying, Nefesh kisimel mal, if a person acts unfaithfully, v'chata bishgaga, and sinned unintentionally, mikoche Hashem, with the by doing something, by making personal of any God's holy items, v'hevias hashami, then he will have to bring his guilt offering, l'Hashem to God, ayil tam will be a ram, unblemished, minat soin, from the he has to bring an unblemished ram from the flock. The erkecha, it has to be at the value of kesef shkolim b'shekel hakodesh la'asham. It has to be at least 2 silver shekel in the sacred shekel of the guilt offering. Let's see Rashi for the explanation here. Verse 15. Kisima mal ein mi'ila b'chol makim elishina. The word mi'ila that we find over here generally means the word moil, changing. You were given to do something, and instead of doing what was intended, you changed from what it was meant to do. He now brings out the verses that it says that they changed from their God and they went to other gods. So too it says by the Soto, that she changed, meaning she went away from the husband that she was supposed to be with. What did he do wrong? He enjoyed from something which was supposed to be holy. It was meant to be holy, and instead of using it for holiness, he used it for personal use. Where was he warned that one is not allowed to do this? As it says, it says over here sin. It says later on sin by the words by truma. They should not carry any sin. Just like over there, they're warned that they're not allowed to use it for their own mundane items. So too, it's telling us that a person is not allowed to use it for mundane items. Over there, it's only referring to a person who eats it. So too, you would think that it only refers to a person who eats from holy things when he's not allowed to. Talmud Leimar, therefore the verse adds the words, kisimel mal. Sima, when you change the direction for what it was intended to do, riba, that it concludes now any time a person uses something of holy for its unintended use, it is considered an abrogation of the holiness, and therefore you would have to bring a sacrifice for it. Mikoche Hashem, this is from the holy things that are given for God, which are said and designated that they should be for godly things. Yatsu Kache Kalam, this excludes things which are not as severe holiness. Ayil, a ram, Loshin Kasha, it already means a ram, which means a grown animal. Kemoy, like we find with the great ones, the strong ones of the land he took. Afkan over here, we're talking about kasha, a strong one, and has to be at least 2 years old. That the actual ram should be worth 2 slime. Verse 16. In addition, he must pay the monetary value of the sacred item in which he sinned. Yeshalim he should pay, and then he has to add on a fifth, that means 25% of its value. Yosef alav he should add. He gives it to the Kohen. The Kohen will then make an atonement with him through the ram of the guilt offering, and he will be forgiven. Verse 16. Rashi, the Keren v'chemesh lehegdish. She has to pay the principal plus 25%. He has to pay to hegdish. He has to pay to the sanctuary. He has to give to the Kohen. Verse 17. V'im nefesh kisechta. Now we go to a suspensive guilt offering. V'im nefesh kisechta. Now, what about these are different types of guilt offerings that can occur if a person makes a sin? If a person transgresses by one of the passive commandments of God, but he didn't know, he does not know if he did it for sure or not. He is not sure if he did that sin. And therefore, he is nonetheless considered guilty and he bears its transgression. Rashi 17. We're talking about in a case where a person comes to a doubt of whether this punishment that he would come to, if he did it intentionally, he would then be punished by dying prematurely. He doesn't know if he transgressed it or not. Kigoin gives an example. A person has in front of him two kinds of fats. One's a prohibited fats, one's a permitted fats. If you eat the prohibited fats, the liability for that is, the punishment for that is premature death. And he thinks, he thought that the fats are both equally the same. He didn't know that one was prohibited and one was permitted. He ate one of them. Afterwards, somebody comes along. Do you know that one of those pieces were prohibited, was chelav? He does not know if he ate the one of chelav or he ate the one of shuman, but if he ate the prohibited one or the permitted one. And as a mevi asher tali, he brings an asher, a guilt offering, a suspensive guilt offering. Megan of this protects him. Because this sacrifice protects him as long as he doesn't know for sure if he sinned. What happens if he finds out later what it really was and that he actually made the transgression? Then he has to bring an actual sin offering. So this is only until he finds out what really happened, or if he never knows, it's even impossible for him to find out. Rabbi Yitzchak says, if we see over here that the verse punishes a person who doesn't know if he did something wrong, how much more so? That it punishes the person who intentionally goes and eats and does something which is wrong. Rabbi Yossi says, if you really want to know the great reward the righteous have, just go look at the punishment of Adam, the first man. He was only commanded one commandment, a negative commandment: do not eat from the tree. And he transgressed and he ate from the tree of knowledge. Look how many deaths have, because of him, death has come into the world for generations to come. And we know that God's measure of good is how much more so than the measure of punishment. So you can imagine that the measure of good that's going to come from following what God says is so much more. If God's measurement for punishment is so small, and still in all there were so many punishments for generations to come of death, how much more so? How much more so a person who follows what God says and refrains from eating things that he's not allowed to eat, refrains from eating on Yom Kippur, and does what he's supposed to do, how much more so that the blessings that he is going to get is going to be for generations and generations and generations to come until the end of time. Rabbi Akiva says, the Torah says according to 2 or 3 witnesses is when somebody dies. If it works by 2, why does the Torah say whether 2 or 3? To be able to be stringent. That means that if 2 witnesses come along and tell per se something, that a person did something, killed one person, and then a 3rd person follows, comes along and says, I also am joining the testimony. And then 2 of them become Eidim Zeimimim. Eidim Zeimimim means that somebody else comes along, another set of witnesses says, how can you come along and say that you saw that person kill that individual? You were with me. Then this person cannot say, I didn't do anything. That if you're going to be part of the witnesses, then you're going to be joining them as well. And the rule of the 3rd person is whatever the first 2 people are as well. Now, he says, if the Torah deals this way to people are just an accessory to a crime, And they're considered as if the people that actually committed the crime. How much more so does God give that God repays the reward to those that are accessory to doing good, to those that do good as well. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says as follows. It says in the Torah, that when you will cut and harvest your field, and you will forget one of the pieces, a bundle in the field, God continues to say that He will bless you. Over here, God's giving you a blessing by something, by the virtue that you didn't even know about it, because you forgot the bundle, and because of that, God is blessing you. How much more so? That if you had a coin that fell out of your pocket and it fell from you and a poor person went and found it, then now that poor person is going to get money because of it, how much more so your blessing is going to be. Verse 18. In order to be able to get an atonement for such a sin that you're not sure about, you have to bring a ram unblemished, from the flock, and the value, to bring it as a guilt offering to the Kohen. The Kohen will then be an atonement for him on his mistake, on the unintentional sin that he may have committed, that he doesn't know about, and he will be forgiven. 18, Rashi, and the same value that we mentioned before, which is the two slime, the two shkalim. Asher shagag v'ula yada. Ha'im yada lachar zman. This is only if he didn't know. But if he does know, lo yineskaper lebashem zed, then this guilt offering doesn't help him. Achiyavi chatas, he has to bring an actual sin offering. What does this compare to? Egla rufa shenisarfa. That if what happens if they do an egla rufa was done, that if they find a person dead and they don't know who actually killed the person, the people from the closest city had to come bring a calf, chop off his head by next to a swamp of water, and this would be considered their atonement. What happens if they did this and then afterwards they find a killer? Then the guy can't say, oh, well, you guys got an atonement already because you killed a calf. No, we still do the punishment to the killer as well. Same too over here. If a person brings a suspensive guilt offering because he doesn't know if he did something wrong, but then he finds out he did something wrong, he's still responsible to bring a sin offering to atone for that sin that he did. Verse 19. Oshem hu Asham Lashem is a guilt offering because he has indeed incurred a guilt before God. Why the three terminologies of Asham? Harishin kuli menukud, a kuli kamatz. The first one has all kamatz. Asham shushem davar. That's a noun. Va'achrein, the last one chetze kamatz v'chetze patach. It's rulashim paul. That's a verb. And then the middle one, v'im toimer, you may say, mikra shalei l'tzeirechu. What's the point of this verse? Kvar darishu b'teres kainim. It explains already in Teres Kainim. Oshem, Osham, lahavi, Ashem shivcha charufa, sheyehoyil, sheyeyayil ben shtei sloim, shenimarabe, Ashem nazir, Ashem mitzeira. This comes to include, the Medrash says that this comes to include other guilt offerings, which is Ashem shivcha charufa, which is mentioned later on, that it has to be brought out of a ram, as well, and it has to be worth value of 2 sloim, as well as the guilt offering for a Nazarite and for a Mitzayra, that it has to be at the same value. Talmud Loimar. Therefore, the verse uses the terminology hu, Ashem hu, meaning it's an exclusion. Not only that only the Ashem Shivcha Charufa is the one similar to here, but not the one of the Nazarite and the Mitzayra. Verse 20. And God speaks to Moshe saying, Nefesh kisechta. If a person acts unfaithfully, umol amol, using the same terminology, and he's by falsely, how does he act unfaithfully to God? By umol amol b'Hashem, he acts unfaithfully to God, v'kichesh b'misei, by denying to another in the person to a claim to a fellow, b'pikadin, about something that was given to him as a collateral, as a deposit, oy b'sesumas yad, or by an object that was taken, or by robbery, or that he withheld wages from his fellow. Rashi 21. Why does it say that he was he's acting unfaithfully to God if these are things between man and his fellow? And this is because that any person that loans money or borrows money or handles with anything, any business should only be done with a document and with witnesses. Therefore, if a person comes along and he tries to deny it, he's denying about the witnesses and the document as well, meaning he's trying to say that everything there was false and it's forged. But when a person gives a deposit by a friend, he doesn't want anybody else to know about it. Why? Because he's afraid people might steal it, whatever it may be. Therefore, when he's denying it, like in this verse, who is he denying? The only one he's denying is about God. And therefore it says he's denying God. He's acting unfaithfully to God, because when you borrow something from somebody, when you're purchasing something, you write a contract. So you're denying, you say the witnesses are lying. You say the documents are false. But when over here, when the third party is God, and you're denying something, and the only one that knows the truth is God, you're acting unfaithful to God. That he gave money to his friend, that he should act in business with it as a loan, b'milva as a loan, or he stole something, or he's supposed to pay him and he didn't pay him. In any of these cases, he's denying that he owes him the money. Or, case 20, verse 22, or he found the lost item, and denies that he ever found it. He's swearing falsely, in any of these cases that a person will do, where he may be sinning in any of these events. Rashi, that he denies in any of these claims against him, and therefore the person sins and he swears falsely in denying that he owes money to any of these individuals. Verse 23. So when it will be that he sinned, and he is guilty. First of all, he has to return with the stolen item that he stole. Or the money or the funds that he owes the person. Or the deposit that was given to him. Or the lost item that he found. Verse 23. When he recognizes that he did something wrong, and he wants to repent, and to admit and to acknowledge that he did something wrong, step number one is you got to return the item. After you return the item, then or anything else that he may have sworn falsely about. First of all, he must pay the principal. He should add 25% to it. Then he has to give it to the owner, the rightful owner, on the day that he acknowledges his guilt. Verse 24, the principal is considered the head because that's the top. Number one, you got to take care of the top. The principal you got to pay up. The principal plus 25% punishment, penalization. The Torah included many that he has to pay 25% for one principal. That if he denies in the principle that he says, I don't owe you the 25%, but he swears, and then he admits, maybe then he has to go pay again. That means, let's say a person says $100, he denies on the $100. So he has to pay up the $100 plus $125. What happens? He says, I paid you the 25. Then he has to, and you find that he's guilty, so he has to pay 25 plus another 25% on the 25, which is $250, which you would have to pay again. So too will continue to work if the person keeps on denying and keeps on going, that he pays another 25% until he keeps on getting smaller and smaller. The principle that he swore to him about, even less than a shava pruta, less than the value of a pruta, then he doesn't have to pay anymore, 25%, because as you go higher, as the amounts diminish, then you come less and less. So the first time it's 100, it's going to be $25, and $25 is going to be $250, and $250 is going to be 25 cents, and 25 cents is going to be 2.5 cents, and each one time it's going to get less and less. To whom the money belongs to. Verse 25, as Hashem Yavil Hashem, and then he'll bring his guilt offering to God, Ayil Tamim, a ram, unblemished, Minatzeh, from his flock, Ke'erkecha, in the value of 2 sloim, L'Oshem, as a guilt offering, Al HaKohen, to the Kohen. The Chiper of HaKohen, the Kohen will be for an atonement for him, L'fnei Hashem, in front of God, V'nislach Loi, and it will be forgiven for him, Al Achas Mikol Asher Esa Yasa La'ashmaba, for any of these things that he may have committed, which incurred a guilt through it. This concludes the Torah reading of Parshas Vayikra.